Alright, hello everybody. Today I'm going to be going over a guide on how to heal Mythic Kil'jaeden. So just basically all the tips and tricks I learnt across our process of getting the boss down. So the first thing I really want to go over is this setup, so talents and gear. You can see from the talents I'm running Senward, Displacer, Feral Affinity, Cultivation, Germination, Flourish. Really the only kind of options you have here is whether you want to take Feral Affinity or Guardian Affinity. Both are good. I found that I was never at risk of dying. I have passive 13.6% avoidance and a huge amount of leech, so I'm basically never at risk of dying. So Feral Affinity, why not have more run speed? If I found myself dying pretty much at all, things like Focus Dread Flames and whatnot, you can surely pick up Guardian Affinity. Frenzy Regen is crazy overpowered, so if you find yourself dying, Guardian Affinity is definitely the way to go. But I personally just found that I was never at risk of dying, so that's why I switched to Feral Affinity about halfway through our progression. So for gear, I just made sure that I was trying to round out my stats using RDSW. You can see what your total stat weights are across your attempts. So overall, I ended up running with about 10k crit, 7k haste, about 3,000 versatility because you have your Vantis rune on when you're fighting Kil'jaeden, and then 12 and a bit k mastery. The important thing here is the haste, so I am still running tier 19 4-piece, so at 7k haste and 6 persistence traits, that's when I do get the extra tick on rejuve, giving me a little bit more value into my tier 19 4-piece. So that's just a specific breakpoint I kind of was trying to reach at, and you just play around with your gems and enchants to make sure you hit that level. So for gear, that's about it. You can just keep an eye on your RDSW and just see how your stat weights are. If you feel like you want a little bit more mastery, just chuck on a couple of rings or whatever with mastery. So into the gameplay now. The first really important thing on this fight to recognize is who's actually going to be taking damage at what points in the fight. There's a lot of periods in this fight where there's no damage at all. So it's really important that you're actually making sure that you save your mana. Now I am playing with a Blessing of Wisdom. Don't need it whatsoever. We did probably our first 150 pulls. Without the Paladin, mana was fine. Just means you cast a little bit less wild growths here and there. Funny thing in this fight, why I actually ended up probably doing so well in the healing is because one of our shaman healers, I'm pretty sure everyone at this fight now realizes that the actual healing requirement after all the nerfs is really, really quite low. The DPS check is really quite low too, so the only really reason you need to bring a 4th healer is to just bring a little bit more consistency into some of these erupting ad phases. Obviously this first phase here with double shaman and heroism going out, there's almost no healing at all. So the first really important thing I'm going to scroll back to here is how we're actually getting set up for this erupting reflections phase. So you can see that I'm DPSing off the pull. The first thing I'm going to be doing is getting rejuves on the people who soak the Armageddons. That's my number one priority because I know they're going to be taking the most amount of damage, but really the most important thing to be doing in this phase is making sure that we get HOTS onto the targets who are going to have their erupting ads die. So these two targets we're going to have is Triangle, Mythichan, and Moon, Baza. So what you're going to see me doing is I'm going to be making sure I double hop both of those targets. I'm life blooming onto Mythi, and I think I'll chuck my Cenarian Ward on him in a second. And this is just to make sure that when they're running off, they're actually getting a large amount of healing. And I'll show you in the logs just shortly after this phase how much, how effective that is. One of the biggest things you can do in this fight to increase your consistency is to make sure that you're healing those targets. The difference between a really good Resto Druid and a average Resto Druid. An average Resto Druid is just going to put HOTS, rejuves on everybody in the raid. A really good Resto Druid is going to realize what targets are actually at risk of dying and use their utility to make sure they actually get the healing. So, as you can see there, we have Senward, lots of healing out into that target. And Mythi is, full HP through that whole phase. The Moonad dies there slightly earlier, that's why you see Baza, kind of run out a little bit late. We just had a little bit, some good RNG, some good procs and whatnot. And another thing to be aware of is which classes actually will need help with the healing there. So warriors can go and distance, they're fine. Shadow priests will disperse, they're always going to be fine to that adds. The targets that are really at risk are the mages. and the hunters. So whenever they get a debuff, they should be prioritized with getting an Iron Bark during that phase, so that makes sure they're full HP. So when the debuff hits, they're going to have that damage reduction, and they're going to get a, they're going to have a lot greater chance at living. So just to go through the logs for that, we can see the healing there. I think where the ad's going to be spawning. We're just going to my healing. So I just want to kind of show you the effectiveness of what just happened there. So this is where the first ads will be spawning, and you'll see. Sorry, we'll zoom in a little bit more. So you can see that my healing isn't particularly high, but a lot of my healing is coming from this big Cenarian ward we have out, the Velens, and yeah, that's, as I said, I'm not really too concerned about actually my overall throughput during that phase. With double Resto Shaman and Heroism, there's not really much point in expending too much mana to heal that. So really it's just, the Velens, making sure the Sen ward goes out. And we can see that Sen ward that I put on Mythi-chan there actually ended up doing almost 5 million healing. So that's an incredible amount of healing just over that short period of time. So that's a really, important thing to understand, is that as a Resto Druid, you could focus your healing onto healing those, priority targets, and they're going to take a lot of healing. So, if you can, as you get more practice in the fight, this is something your healing should be looking like, where you're actually getting, I wouldn't say, it's probably, you are getting a lot of healing out, but majority of your healing wants to be on those priority targets. So, throughout this fight, I know my healing meter is set on the last fight overall. For this fight, I ended up doing, I think, 1.3 mil HPS overall. I think I did pretty well. But again, that's mostly just considering our Resto Shaman Nara is actually just fucking DPSing majority of this encounter, just because we realized that, that the healing requirement is very low, and we never had any issues with healing on this fight pretty much whatsoever. So, you got to keep in mind that's why my healing is quite high, is because we essentially are 3.5 healing, because one of our healers is just DPSing. Now this is another pretty mission critical part of the fight. I myself are the healer who is responsible at dispelling these tank debuffs. Now, to give you an idea of the consistency you're looking for, I missed one dispel in about 250 pulls, and that's one dispel over every single attempt we had. And that is because from the first pull we had, I had a plan of how to do these dispels. We made sure that the tanks are on the same side together, and that when that dispel is coming, I'm not wasting my globals. I'm just sitting there doing nothing, making sure that I'm ready to get the dispel. You'll notice here, about 3 seconds before the dispel comes out, I actually just stopped casting spells. The one time I missed a dispel was because I casted a Wild Growth, had a Rejuve proc, I wanted to get that Rejuve proc out, and I was a bit late to the dispel. So you'll see right now, I won't cast another spell. I'll just sit still, wait for the dispel to get knocked back, and then dispel the tank. So that's, if you're going to be the dispelling healer, consistency, because that will be 100% raid wipe if you miss that dispel there. Nothing is more important than making sure you get that dispel. So if you're as a healer, constantly missing that dispel there, really look at what you're doing. Consider just stop doing anything, for the couple seconds up to that point, and just never miss it. There isn't anything going on in the fight at that point, so there's really not much excuse for missing it. Now during this intermission phase here, this is where Resto Druid really shines. So, obviously being able to just spam cast out rejuves. There isn't much healing going on in this fight, so there's not, at this point in the fight, in the intermission. Intermission is quite boring, and I think everyone really who's done this knows that. Just making sure that you're rolling rejuves onto the targets with the Armageddons. Nothing really too special, except for the timing of your cooldown. So we have a Healing Tide Totem going off at the start of this phase, and then I'm Tranquilitying for the last 2 knockbacks. And that's specifically so that when the burstings come out after the intermission, that everyone's full HP going into it. During that set of 6 there, I'm using my Essence of Garnier just to increase the healing a little bit. Why not? And just to save mana. So you'll see that pretty much throughout this first phase of the fight, that I think every healer is going to come to after these next healing as that are going to come up, we're going to all be at full mana, which is really what you're going to be trying to strive for as healers. Just making sure that you're maximizing your mana efficiency throughout this entire fight, because you need a lot of mana for the last phase, depending, because it can actually go for quite a long time if you have a couple early deaths. So you'll see there, we come out of the phase because I tranked at the last point, everyone's full HP, no one's really at risk at dying to the burstings. Easy peasy. So I did change that, my tranquility during the intermission a couple times, and I just felt like that was the most consistent. But again, we never really had any problems in the intermission. So again, Armageddon coming up here, and then rupturing in the top, and these are the first healing as they're coming out. Now, obviously, if I wanted to get a rank 1 healing log, healing these Hopeless Reflections would be a great idea to do, because you can get 100% healing on them, you can get some really nice mastery stacks or whatever, but that's a complete waste of my time. We have Holy Paladins who can essentially solo it, so you'll see I don't even touch them. I literally just go back to healing the raid as soon as we get knocked back here, so we'll stack them up in the airflow. I think my airflow positioning is pretty poor there, but could be a bit up more. But yeah, so you'll see what I actually do in this phase is, because I'm aware that as soon as those healing ads come out, any smart healing is going to kind of be sucked up into those healing ads, so I actually end up popping my Velens before we get knocked back here, and that's just to make sure we get a little bit more healing out, because there's this focused red flame coming straight afterwards. You are pretty susceptible to dying to this focused red flame if you're not popping a defensive, you're not full HP or whatnot. So that's why I actually pop my healing CDs a bit before this comes out, just so we can make sure everyone's topped. My essence timing is a bit late, just because I popped it a bit late in the intermission. So if that was up a bit earlier, it'd be perfect. But it's up now. And just to give you an idea of what I mean, when I cast my Wild Growth here, it only hits 2 people, and the rest go into the healing ads. So as I said, I don't really care too much about healing those healing ads, because the Holy Paladin is just going to press 200 mil Holy Shock and just heal them up. So that's just kind of a little thing to note about the consistency. You want to be making sure that, I think as a Restorer, that's definitely the right thing to do, is making sure that you're actually popping your CDs before those healing ads come out, just to make sure no one dies. So I'm getting just bare form Barkskin. I'm getting just reduce the damage a little bit. Again, as I said, I got a large amount of leech, large amount of avoidance. So I'm never really at risk of dying in this fight. So something I haven't really spoken on is my innovate timings. So I get an innovate for those first set of ads. The reason for that, just because we have 3 of them, and again, you may as well use them. So, and then I'm using my second innovate for the first healing ad, and I'm using my first innovate for the first healing ad, and then my second innovate for the second healing ad here. Reason for that, just I want to get it on cooldown. We do have the DPS actually soaking the Sorrowful Whale there, just because it was never really at risk of people dying, so I just use my innovate there and just make sure people are full HP. Again, that knockback there, you'll see that I make sure I stop casting before the knockback's about to go off, like 2-3 seconds before, and just never miss that dispel. So Armageddon coming up. I think I'm going to get 2 stacks here. I think I bare format, I'm not sure, I can't remember. But Armageddon bursting, not really the most dangerous thing. You'll find with the, this fight's been nerfed so many times, there's not really much you have to think about with a lot of these transitions, so... again, we're just making sure that we're super consistent with how we're healing. Just making sure that we try and get as many rejuves on targets with Armageddon as possible, because it is a very, very, very mana efficient heal. So, using bare form for the Focused Dread Flame, because why not? And just doing our job as a healer and soaking. Again, you'll find most healers should have a little bit of leech, so you'll see, pretty much healers should be prioritized to soak the Armageddons. That's just because you're generally very efficient at healing yourself through it. Again, you'll see there, I make sure I stop casting before the dispel, just to make sure I never miss it. And this is probably the most critical point in the fight, is the second erupting ads. Now, something we had originally was that I was getting the bop and I was soaking the tank ad. But actually in the last night I was kind of thinking about this, and I thought this wasn't really the best idea, considering that we were having a lot of issues with the people who get the erupting ads dying to the debuffs. So we decided to change this up, so the Paladin actually just is going to bop himself and soak the Armageddon rather than myself, and I'm just going to sit here and focus on healing. So my job during this phase then will to make sure that I basically get full hots on anybody who gets the triangle or triangle or moon marker, and then the diamond marker will be suiciding. So you'll see into this fight, I do make a minor mistake. I don't have Velens up, which is, it's a bit more than a minor mistake. It's a pretty big mistake, because Velens does a lot of healing during this phase. not the most ideal thing, but you know, we get around it. So you'll see here immediately the first thing I'm doing is I know Malice, the triangle marker, will be the first person taking damage, so I make sure I get double rejuve life bloom on him. So make sure that goes off. You'll see Malice running out now, and I will be swiftmaning him just before the damage comes out. So swiftman there, so he's full HP. Valens comes up, good. And I'll be Valens tranking. So you'll see there, Malice is running off. Malice full HP, no worries. Gets topped before the debuff comes out. Has double rejuve life bloom. Life bloom ticks off just as the thing ends, and he's full HP the whole time. Really easy way of making sure that those markers survive. Again, I said the mages, hunters are the ones who are most susceptible at dying, so you got to make sure you pay extra attention if they're the ones who are getting the debuffs. So you know, that's a little idea of kind of what you want to be striving for in this fight, what you want to be doing just to make sure you're maximizing your consistency. So we do have a little bit of a miscommunication between here, me and the mage. You know, we both kind of blinked into that, but that's not a big deal. So these last healing ads here, I kind of take the same approach where I prefer to heal the raid because I know shamans and paladins are going to be a lot more efficient at healing those healing ads. So you know, I'll put a couple of rejuves out on them, but I won't really focus on healing them because I know the raid is about to take a lot of damage to the explosions from these ads. So I do chuck a couple of rejuves out on them, but you know, I'm not actively casting too heavily into them. So during this Armageddon here, this is where I channel my mana pot. We're just about to go into the last phase. Last phase, you really don't have an opportunity to mana pot at a great time. Nothing's happening here. I just let my other healers pick up the slack at this point. You'll see going to this last phase here, just to give you an idea about how you should be approaching it in terms of mana wise. All the healers are on 80%. I'm on 70%. Nub's on 90%. Yeah, I mean that should really speak, you know, a lot about how much healing actually goes into this this phase. Sorry, I skipped ahead. So I have my innovate up. I'm going to be using in this intermission, just because, again, just want to make sure we're full mana going into the last phase. So we're getting the buff here. There was a slight mistake there. I should have actually innovated before I cast that wild growth, but you know, I think I do get another wild growth cast off in my innovate, so it's not the end of the world. No, I don't. So there you go. That's a pretty big mistake, not actually getting that first wild growth off in the innovate. Obviously, I am trying to make a lot of calls and focus on other things. So I don't play perfectly, but I think I play pretty well in general. So one thing I can actually be doing is in that intermission, I know it doesn't last the longest amount of time, but I should actually be trying to make sure I get rejuves onto everybody here rather than just focusing on the people with the Armageddons. And that's just because when the next phase hits, all those rejuves are going to get the deep-rooted proc, and then everyone's going to proc a cultivation, so that's going to be a really large amount of healing to spring back from. But you'll see more of my strategy here is kind of just rejuving single people using things like sand water and whatnot. You know, both are good. I think I could probably get a bit more cast out during this phase. I think I do miss a couple globals, but you know, it's not the end of the world. So coming to here, I think I flourish my wild growth, pop my bark skin, rally goes out, link goes out, and we're just healing people back up. This is probably one of the harder healing points in the fight. Actually, this just transmission here, just because you have, you know, a couple of people have the Armageddons and whatnot, but the healing does kind of slow way down after those Armageddons tick off. This last phase is quite straightforward to heal. There's not too much going on. There's a lot of raid damage, and you just gotta make sure you get to the obelisks. But if you do the phase correctly and kite the orbs correctly, you know, not too many people should be getting too many stacks, and the raid damage should remain pretty stable to heal. You can see that, as I said before, all of our healers basically went into this last phase with a lot of mana. So I basically take use of, I think, all the innovates in this phase, just because, you know, shamans and paladins don't actually use mana, so it's quite neat. We do have a slight mistake with the number of people we've outside, and I think that ends up killing Zeose. But, you know, we only had probably 10, 15 pulls in this last phase, so we weren't exactly the most perfect thing. Here's an interesting little bug that caused a bit of confusion. So Nub misses the knockback there. He gets ported back on. I res him straight away, and he dies instantly straight away. Don't know what actually caused that. Super frustrating that we actually had to waste the B-res to that bug. But, you know, if you ever see that, that does happen. So I use my Essence and Trank during this point here. That's just because a lot of people are at large potential. That's probably the hardest overlap, the hardest healing point in the fight, is when those burstings come out and the focus come out. You know, if your druids and rogues or whatever get targeted with the bursting, they're not going to be able to soak the focused. It can get a little messy which people are soaking the focused red flame. So you just want to make sure everyone's stopped. So I highly suggest if you have healing CDs, you're popping them for that point. So we actually have a Trank and Tide go off there, just to make sure we're topping up the raid. Now this focus thing here, you can see that Zeose dies there. Not actually sure why that is. You know, the Rift had plenty of HP there. It didn't say we needed anybody outside, but you know, shit happens. So again, last phase healing wise, kind of pretty boring. I don't think I'll actually cover it too much. You know, you're really just going through and making sure that you just, you know, raid healing. Raid healing as a druid is pretty simple. You just kind of spam rejuve and wild growth on CD. Use your innovates and whatnot. Nice little end of the fight. We kind of fuck up the obelisk. Go bear form, taunt it across the map, and it does. Alright, so that's it for Mythic Kil'jaeden. It's you know, there's a lot of finesse to doing a lot of it. And there's a lot you can pick up, but I mean, you're probably going to have quite a number of attempts at doing it. This is just some thoughts and ideas of, you know, what you can be imploring and what you're doing. I can say probably the biggest thing as a healer is making sure you don't fuck up those dispels. I can't stress that enough. If you're consistently missing the dispels, then you're going to have a pretty big problem. What was I going to show you here? So this is just the second healing ads. Most of my healing comes from Tranquility. It's only like a 20 mil Trank, so it's not that high. We only get like a 5 mil Velens. You know, it's pretty basic, that healing point. You know, there's not really much to do when you're just casting Trank and putting on a couple of rejuves. But you can see overall for the fight, my Leech did 6.6% of my healing. You know, Leech is crazy valuable on, you know, it's been pretty valuable on actually the last 3 fights in Timos Lagares, which is, you know, really quite nice. So I highly recommend you pick up a little bit of Leech on your gear. Closing comments. I guess the one thing that's kind of interesting is I did kill the boss with the nerf to tier 19, and I'm still using it. I mean, tier 19 still is like a, you know, 10% basically more rejuve healing, so it does equate to quite a bit. You know, because every rejuve you cast, you essentially have 10 chances at a 1% chance to get another rejuve. So whatever that math works out to be. So you do get quite a bit from it. You pretty much want to be keeping your tier 19 2-piece, just because 4000 mastery proc and wild growth when you're actually doing healing is very valuable. So keeping your tier 19 2-piece is quite nice. I'm fortunate enough to have a decent eye level hands and legs. I have Leech on my chest, and I just have a 9/10 cloak. So, you know, me really picking up tier 20 isn't really that big of an upgrade. You know, it's a couple eye level on a couple of pieces. I did try it out for a while, tier 20. The problem with it I kind of found was that like I was running 2-piece, 4-piece. I found that because I had to drop, you know, Leech on 2 pieces of gear, so my helm, my chest, I was losing a pretty significant amount from that. I also had to drop Amanthal's Wisdom, which is really powerful for Kil'jaeden, just because there's a lot of points in the fight where there is no healing. So just having those rejuves out for a longer time is really nice. Also, you know, you can put your rejuves on targets with the Armageddons. You know, they might get to full HP. You know, they might get topped off during it, and you still get more value from those rejuves. So the shoulders are just, you know, really super powerful. So yeah, I hope this helps you out. I hope you learned something, and thanks for watching.